Today, something happened that completely overturns the entire narrative of this war. The negotiators reached an agreement. American and Iranian representatives achieved a preliminary deal, a 60-day ceasefire and continued negotiations over the nuclear program, a framework that could pave the way toward a permanent agreement. Iran said yes, and J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States and the number 2 figure in the American government, publicly stated today, "I think it is difficult to say exactly when or whether the president intends to sign the declaration of intent, whether the president will approve it." This is not a comment from an opposition politician. This is not a critical journalist. This is the vice president openly acknowledging that his own president may be sabotaging an agreement negotiated by his own representatives. Let that sink in for a moment. 88 days of war, billions of dollars, human lives lost, and economic damage reaching hundreds of billions for the global economy. And at the end of this process, the negotiators say, "We have an agreement." Iran agrees, and Trump hesitates. So who is obstructing peace here? That is the key question today, and the answer is more complicated and explosive than any headline suggests. Stay tuned. This is Nexus Report. Let's separate the facts from the hysterical fear-mongering. Bloomberg and Axios confirmed the agreement today, 2 of the most reliable sources for American domestic politics and diplomacy. This is not rumor or speculation. This is verified reporting at the highest level. According to Bloomberg, the preliminary agreement includes a 60-day extension of the ceasefire, the resumption of nuclear negotiations under a new framework, and most importantly, no complete resolution of the Hormuz issue at this stage. That matter will remain excluded during the 60-day period. CNN described it as a positive development, a step toward peace. Germany's Tagesschau presented it as a possible end of the war coming into view. Bloomberg itself was more cautious. Trump has not yet approved the conditions, and this is where the real analysis begins. Why did the negotiators reach an agreement, and why is Trump hesitating? The American negotiating team, operating under Rubio's coordination, and the Iranian side through the foreign ministry under Arakchi, have negotiated for months. They know the details, they understand the red lines, and they found an arrangement that allows both sides to save face. That is professional diplomacy. That is their job, and they have done it. Trump is not a diplomat. Trump sees himself as a deal maker. And a deal maker does not sign if he believes he can still extract more concessions, or if he believes the public reaction to the deal could disappoint his political base. And that is the problem. Trump supporters, the voters who elected him and whom he appealed to with hardline rhetoric on Iran, expect total victory. 0 nuclear weapons, an open Hormuz Strait, and Iran brought to its knees. That was the language of the election campaign. That was the language of the first weeks of the war. And now there is an agreement on the table that does not force Iran to surrender, that does not destroy the nuclear program, but merely freezes it, that does not fully reopen Hormuz, but instead postpones the issue for 60 days. This is not total victory. It is a compromise. And for Trump, compromise is politically dangerous. Subscribe to Nexus Report now. I am not a young influencer with flashy graphics. I am someone who has observed this world for decades. Conflicts, diplomacy, and the decisions that never make the main headlines. That is exactly why you find analyses here that you will not get anywhere else. Your subscription gives me the motivation to dig deeper, look closer, and deliver an even better analysis tomorrow. Tell me in the comments which country you are watching from. That shows me this analysis is reaching the places it needs to reach. Now to J.D. Vance and what his statement really means. I think it is difficult to say exactly when or whether the president will sign the declaration of intent. That is an extraordinary statement. In the normal functioning of a government, a vice president does not say such things publicly. The vice president is the symbol of loyalty. He defends the president. He explains the president's decisions. He does not publicly question them. So why is Vance doing it anyway? There are 3 possible explanations, all realistic. Explanation 1. Vance is signaling to Iran and the international community that he personally supports the deal, and that the resistance is coming from Trump, not from the entire American government. That is a diplomatic message. Continue negotiating. Do not give up. We are not united internally, but there is a faction that wants an agreement. Explanation 2. Vance is positioning himself for the post-Trump era. He knows that a failed Iran agreement could go down in history as a mistake of the Trump administration. By publicly creating distance, he is protecting his own political future. Explanation 3. It is internal pressure. Vance is publicly voicing what is being discussed privately, hoping that public pressure will push Trump to sign. This is internal government pressure used as a diplomatic tool. All three explanations may be true at the same time, and all three point to the same conclusion. Today, there is no unified position on Iran within the Trump administration. There is a president who hesitates, a vice president who doubts, and negotiators who achieved an agreement that nobody publicly defends. That is the domestic political dimension of today's developments, and it is at least as important as the diplomatic one. Now to the Iranian side, and what a 60-day extension means for Tehran. Iran said yes, and that is not insignificant. 3 weeks ago, Iran publicly rejected any discussion of an agreement. An IRGC commander said, "America is weak. We do not fear another war." Araghchi said there would be no compromise on the nuclear issue or Hormuz. And today, Iran says yes to a preliminary agreement. Why the change in direction? The answer lies in the strategic logic Iran has developed over these 88 days. Iran has at least partially achieved its core objectives: regime survival, control over Hormuz as a negotiating tool, and international recognition as a major actor. Now, from a position of relative strength, Iran can agree to a ceasefire without appearing to surrender. And from the Iranian perspective, a 60-day extension is not a compromise. It is a gain. Why? Because 60 days give Iran time to continue advancing the nuclear program in Fordo, which remains intact, time to reorganize and strengthen the IRGC, time to reduce economic losses through possible sanctions relief if that becomes part of the agreement, time to deepen diplomatic channels with Pakistan, China, and Russia. For Iran, 60 days of ceasefire are not a pause. They are investment time. And that is the strategic reason Iran agreed more quickly than expected. Now to the economic dimension, because the market reaction to today's developments has direct consequences for everyone. Brent crude fell slightly today to around $97 to $98 after Bloomberg reported the preliminary agreement. That is the automatic market reaction. Progress in negotiations reduces the risk premium in oil prices. But here is the critical nuance traders and analysts are discussing today. Oil prices did not fall because Hormuz is reopening. They fell because uncertainty declined slightly. That is a fundamental difference. Hormuz is excluded from the preliminary agreement. No resolution, no reopening, only a 60-day pause during which the situation remains frozen. That means the structural cause of high oil prices, the restricted passage through Hormuz, remains unchanged. The markets will realize this in the coming days, and Brent crude may rise again once it becomes clear that a preliminary agreement without a Hormuz resolution does not eliminate the underlying problem. For Germany specifically, the short-term relief at gas stations and on energy bills that many are expecting today will likely be smaller than hoped and shorter-lived than anticipated. That is the economic reality behind today's optimism. Now let us examine the historical parallel that best explains why Trump's hesitation is strategically so dangerous. The Paris Peace Accords, January 1973. Vietnam. Nixon and Kissinger negotiated an agreement after years of talks that allowed American troops to withdraw from Vietnam. The agreement was imperfect. It did not resolve the core issues of the conflict, but it allowed America to end the war without officially losing. Nixon hesitated. He believed additional bombings would produce a better position. The so-called Christmas bombings of 1972, massive airstrikes against North Vietnam in the weeks before the signing, were his attempt to extract more concessions. The result? The peace negotiations were temporarily pushed backward. Internationally, America's allies condemned the bombings. Domestically, pressure on Nixon continued to rise, and the final agreement was barely better than the one he could have signed before the bombings. That is the pattern now repeating itself in Washington. Trump may believe that more hesitation, more threats, and more pressure can force additional concessions from Iran. The 60-day agreement is not enough for him. He wants more. But the strategic logic shows that further delay does not improve the American position. Iran has proven its resilience. The domestic political costs in America continue to rise. The economic costs for allies continue to increase. And every day without a signed agreement strengthens Iran's negotiating position rather than weakening it. That is the lesson from Paris in 1973, and it is relevant again today. Let me outline the 3 concrete scenarios for the next 48 hours. Scenario 1. Trump signs. The domestic pressure from Vance, from America's allies, from the markets, and from his own negotiating delegation becomes strong enough that Trump signs the declaration of intent. The 60-day ceasefire formally begins. Brent crude falls to $85 to $90. Economic advisors slightly revise forecasts upward. Trump presents it as a victory. I forced Iran to back down. That is the best short-term scenario for the global economy. Scenario 2. Trump rejects the agreement. He declares the preliminary deal insufficient. He demands more concessions from Iran, a complete reopening of Hormuz, and stricter nuclear conditions. Iran refuses, negotiations collapse, and a new escalation phase begins, with Brent crude reaching $120. Germany enters recession, and Vance, who publicly expressed doubts today, appears as the prophet of an avoidable failure. Scenario 3. Trump continues to hesitate. No yes, no no. The declaration of intent remains unsigned. Both sides maintain the ceasefire informally because neither side wants escalation. Negotiations continue. Markets remain uncertain. Brent fluctuates sharply. And in 30 days, the world faces the same questions again, except that frustration among all parties has grown. This third scenario appears the most likely today because Trump historically rarely makes quick decisions when he believes waiting gives him more leverage. What we witness today is a turning point in the psychology of this war. For the first time in 88 days, it is not Iran saying no. It is America. It is Trump hesitating. It is Vance expressing doubt. It is American negotiators reaching an agreement that their own president may refuse to sign. This is the reversal of the narrative Washington has communicated since the war began. America wanted peace, Iran blocked it. America wanted negotiations, Iran sabotaged them. Today the situation is reversed, and that is the story Nexus Report is telling today. But let me go one step further, because the dynamic between Trump, Vance, and the negotiators raises a deeper structural question. What happens when a president no longer trusts his own negotiators? In the history of American diplomacy, there have been moments when the gap between what diplomats negotiate and what presidents are willing to sign became the decisive factor. The most famous example is Woodrow Wilson and the League of Nations. After the First World War, Wilson personally pushed the concept of the League of Nations and made dozens of compromises at the Paris Peace Conference in 1919 to preserve it. And then the American Senate rejected the outcome. Wilson negotiated without securing domestic political support beforehand. The pattern repeats itself today in reverse form. Trump's negotiators negotiated, they reached an agreement, and now it is the president himself who may reject the result produced by his own delegation. This is a structural problem that extends far beyond Iran. It is the problem of a leadership style in which the president reserves the right to revise everything at any moment, including the work of his closest advisors. For international diplomacy, this has long-term consequences. If other countries see that an agreement with American negotiators does not guarantee presidential approval, then the willingness to invest in intensive negotiations declines. Why negotiate for months if the outcome ultimately depends on the mood of one individual? That is the diplomatic capital America is consuming right now. Not money, not weapons, but credibility as a negotiating partner. Now to a question almost nobody is asking today, but strategically it is the most important one. What does Iran actually want from these 60 days? The superficial answer is a ceasefire, sanctions relief, and time. But the deeper answer is more complex. After 88 days of war, Iran is in a paradoxical position. Strategically, it performed better than expected, but economically, the damage is severe. The Iranian economy is suffering, and the population is suffering. The sanctions represent the harshest regime ever imposed on a single country. A 60-day ceasefire with the prospect of sanctions relief is not only a strategic gain for Iran, it is an economic necessity. And here lies the leverage Western negotiators possess and have not fully used. Iran needs economic relief. That is the regime's real weakness, not military defeat, but economic pressure. Whoever offers Iran economic relief in exchange for clear and verifiable concessions on the nuclear program has a genuine basis for negotiation. That is the deal that could actually work. Not a total American victory, not Iranian capitulation, but a transactional exchange, economic normalization in return for verifiable nuclear restrictions. That is likely what the negotiators outlined in the preliminary agreement. And that is what Trump is now considering, whether this exchange is sufficient. The answer provided by every serious analytical assessment is yes. It is not perfect. It is not total victory, but it is realistic, negotiable, and verifiable. And an agreement that is realistic, negotiable, and verifiable is better than an endless war. That is the message Vance indirectly sent today. That is the message Nexus Report is expressing directly. Now to the human dimension of this decision. While Trump considers whether to sign, there are people whose lives directly depend on this decision. American soldiers in bases and aboard ships who risk being hit every day by Iranian missiles or drones. Iranian civilians who have spent 88 days living in a country under bombardment. Sailors aboard tankers in the Persian Gulf who do not know whether their vessel will become the next target. German workers in companies whose investments are frozen because no executive board wants to plan long-term in this environment. These are the people for whom the next 48 hours are decisive. Not politicians, not analysts, but ordinary people. And that is why this decision is more than a diplomatic document. A single stroke of Trump's pen could save lives over the next 60 days, lower energy prices, and unlock economic investment. That is the tangible impact of an agreement, and Trump's hesitation prolongs everything for additional weeks or months. More risks, more costs, more uncertainty. That is the simplest analysis of today, and at the same time the most important one. If Trump signs today or tomorrow, the analysis will continue right here. What these 60 days mean for Iran, what America has truly conceded, and why this agreement could face the same questions again in 60 days. If Trump rejects the agreement and the situation escalates, you will understand the connections through the ERS military report long before the mainstream media understands what has happened. And if the hesitation continues and uncertainty itself becomes the strategy, the ERS military report will be the place where you understand why Germany and Europe continue paying the price while Washington waits for a better offer that may never come. Subscribe now to the ERS military report and activate notifications. Facts first, analysis afterward, and what all of this truly means for you and for all of us.